Fights Back for You on AM 740 Zoomer Radio. Goldhawk Fights Back for You airs Monday to Friday, 11 to 1 on AM 740 Zoomer Radio.
Buying beer is about to become more convenient in Toronto. A published report today says Ontarians will soon be able to buy beer in some 300 grocery stores. But the more complicated expansion of wine sales in grocery stores is going to take longer to implement. The Toronto Star says Finance Minister Charles Sousa is unveiling the much-anticipated beer plan in his April 23rd budget, but wine drinkers will have to wait because of international trade agreements and other issues. To speak more about the changing landscape in Ontario supermarkets, Steve Beauchesne of the Ontario Craft Brewers joins me on the line. Steve, hi there.
How you doing?
Good. Since we spoke last month, it's become all but confirmed that beer will be sold in about a third of the province's grocery stores. Good news for craft brewers?
Well, I have to start by saying that we have been asked, the craft brewers have been asked to sign a non-disclosure agreement. So I'm not able to speculate on whether or not that's something that might be happening. But what I can say is that opening up the grocery stores was not sort of specifically an Ontario Craft Brewers request. It has the possibility of being good for us, but there's some challenges that might present itself if it's not sort of rolled out in a way that protects craft beer.
We're asking you today here on AM 740's Goldhawk Fights Back with Jane Brown. Are you in favor of the plan? Would you like to see widespread beer sales, or is this a good way to start, having beer sold in 300 grocery stores? 416-360-0740 or 1-866-740-4740. Are you a craft beer drinker, or do you support the big breweries? We'd like to hear your answer to that and your thoughts on the changing landscape for beer sales in Ontario. 416-360-0740 or 1-866-740-4740. Now, Steve, you've probably heard, and I'm wondering if there's any merit to the buzz that the Wynne government wants to make it easier for Ontario craft brewers to get their beers on supermarket shelves and in bars and restaurants and bypassing the beer store. Do you see that happening?
Well, so what we've been asking for is better access to customers, and we've been asking for changes in the beer store system. The grocery store was not specifically our request, and our feeling is that if it's rolled out in a way where sort of craft brewers are protected, so there's a certain amount of shelf space that craft brewers are able to sort of be given, that the grocery stores aren't able to turn around and charge us shelving fees or listing fees or make the sort of their markup sort of cost prohibitive for us. It could be beneficial, but without knowing exactly how the plan's going to roll out, we can't necessarily say if it would be good or bad for us.
Okay,
so there's definitely a possibility, but a lot of concern as well.
Let's talk more about that plan. We're speaking with Beauchesne of the Ontario Craft Brewers, and I know you're on the line there from Portland at the Craft Brewers Convention. Your cell line is a little shaky, Steve. Maybe you could just move to another part of the office that you're in, and we'll start to take some calls here as well about craft brewers. Are you in favor of a craft brew? Do you have some opinion about that? Are you supporting the big breweries? Do you want to see beer sold outside the beer store? Would you like to be able to get it along with your milk and your bread and your produce at your local grocery store? 416-360-0740 or 1-866-740-4740. So the plan is expected to be recommended in a report tomorrow by former TD Bank CEO Ed Clark for grocery store beer sales. There is every indication the Liberals will announce that licenses to sell beer in about 300 supermarkets will be auctioned off with no single grocery company allowed to buy more than 25% of them. Steve, how will this affect the craft brewers industry? Who's going to get these licenses?
Well, I don't know for sure that it is happening, but if the licenses are given out, I really don't have any knowledge of how the auction would happen. From the craft brewers' perspective, what we're most concerned about is that whatever grocery stores do get, if they get licenses, that they're not able to turn around and sort of resell the shelf space to breweries, because we're too small to really absorb or pay for expensive shelf space. And that's one of our biggest concerns at the beer store currently. Is it's very expensive to list a beer at the beer store.
It's very difficult to do what, sorry?
To get your beer on the shelves at the beer store.
Okay.
They charge quite a bit.
Well,
and we're worried that process might be replicated at grocery stores if it's not protected by the government.
And I think that this part would be good news. As part of that Toronto Star report this morning, it says the beer store will be expected to open more shelf space to Ontario's 150 craft brewers. Does that mean that the cost stays the same, or there will be more openness for the craft brewers to sell their products in the beer store?
Well, we've had a number of long-standing issues with the way the beer store works, and one of them is definitely the cost to list your beer. And then another very big problem has been that when you paid for your listing, you really only get your beer in the back of the warehouse.
Mm-hmm.
There's no way for the customer to ever see it,
right?
Because they only put the owner's brand out front. So it's certainly something we've been asking for quite some time. Is fairness and sort of a equal footing at the beer store.
And we'll talk
because it's owned by our competitors. We really feel there needs to be sort of a way for us to have a level playing field in there.
Darlene from Oakville is on the line. What do you think about beer being sold in some of Ontario's grocery stores?
I would like to see beer stay in the beer stores.
And why is that?
I think it's reasonable that if you want to have beer, you can go to the beer store. If you want to buy groceries, you go to the grocery store.
What about the convenience, Darlene? And the trust that the Ontario public, the Ontario taxpayers, will respect the idea that alcohol can be sold in some form outside of the designated beer store or LCBO. Don't we deserve that as consumers, just to make our own lives easier?
I think it could make a lot of things change and may be difficult in ways that people won't be behaving in a proper manner.
And what do you think some of those ways might end up being?
Well, it will be more so like it's not a privilege.
Mm-hmm.
You basically can go and get groceries as well as beer at the same time, which is ridiculous. Like, you know, you're going to buy groceries to support your family and to feed your family, not to buy beer.
So we want to know if you're in favor of the plan, and thank you for your call, Darlene. There obviously are a lot of Ontarians out there that feel the same way. What's interesting about this approach, selling beer in 300 grocery stores, there are about 1,000 grocery stores in the province of Ontario, so this would be less than a third that would be selling beer to start, an announcement which is expected in the April 23rd budget. So do you like the idea? I mean, we're just kind of we're experimenting with the idea by having beer in a third of the grocery stores, less than a third. Is that a good idea to see if it might work in a more widespread way? 416-360-0740 or 1-866-740-4740. Let's talk about the cost of beer. Steve Beauchesne is with me on the line from the Craft Brewers Convention in Portland. He's with the Ontario Craft Brewers. Steve, I get this complaint all the time from beer drinkers about the cost of beer, especially in Ontario. When you compare it to Quebec, where it's about half the price, is just going through the roof. It just keeps going up and up. Is this something the craft brewers have to also embrace in order to stay competitive, or are you planning to keep prices lower? How does that work?
Well, it's kind of an interesting thing. Craft beer is not your cheapest option for beer, so it tends to be that people that want to drink good beer, they drink a little bit less of it, and they don't typically mind paying a little bit more for higher quality. I can tell you, we sell our beer in Quebec and Ontario, and it's basically the same price in both provinces.
I was just in a Quebec Costco, and we paid about half the price for the beer. Is that just a Costco thing?
Yeah, I mean, if you're looking for sort of lowest common denominator beer, yeah, you can probably find cheaper beer in Quebec when you're buying in bulk at a Costco. But if you go to a regular dépanneur in Quebec, you're going to be paying about the same price. The other thing to remember is that in Quebec, they don't list the deposit or the taxes, so the sticker price seems a lot less. And then when you get to the counter, it jumps up in price, and it's not quite as good a deal as it might have seemed on the shelf.
Okay, that's interesting. Let's talk to Brian from East York. What do you think about this, Brian?
Hi, Jane. How are you?
I'm well. How are you?
Oh, I'm doing great. I know what all the mystery is down here in Toronto. I go up to Halliburton, and I know of 2 grocery stores that sell beer, wine, and liquor. There also is a gas station that sells beer and wine and liquor up there, so I don't know what the big deal is.
Yeah, that is the case, isn't it, Steve, in some smaller communities in Ontario?
That's right. They're called agency stores, and basically in areas where it just doesn't make sense to have a fully functioning LCBO store, they'll issue sort of agency licenses so that you can still find beer or wine at a sort of convenience store or a grocery store in kind of more remote areas.
And Brian, based on your experience, is that going well in the communities that you visit? Are there any issues, safety issues, concerns for consumerism in those small communities?
There's been no safety issues or anything. There's one thing, getting to the answer the craft beer guy. If a lot of people in the area, they don't have that much shelf space, of course. So if they find out what the people normally drink there, they'll get that brand in for them.
That's some good advice for you, Steve.
Well, one guy, he happens to be the butcher, and he owns the store, and he sells everything. But the gas station was the one that really shocked me. I went in there, and they got a beer and liquor store in there.
You can't ask for more convenience than that.
Yeah, you can fill up your tank, but the one that you're riding in yours.
That's it. Brian, thanks for your call. We want to hear... go ahead, Steve.
He does bring up a wonderful point that Ontario craft brewers have been somewhat concerned about, is that if a grocery store gets these licenses and only opens up 5 feet of beer sales, there's not going to be enough room for all the craft beer that's out there. We currently have about 150 operating craft breweries in this province, and there's hundreds more that are going to be opening up in the coming years. And there needs to be a place to put that beer on the shelf. And so we're somewhat concerned as well that if the grocery stores open up only a very limited amount of shelf space, that won't be able to accommodate the amount of beer that consumers really want to have access to.
You're listening to an exclusive podcast of Goldhawk Fights Back for You on AM 740 Zoomer Radio. Goldhawk Fights Back for You airs Monday to Friday, 11 to 1 on AM 740 Zoomer Radio.
Well, it looks as though we'll hear on April 23rd, when the budget is announced by Ontario Finance Minister Charles Sousa, that beer will be sold in 300 Ontario grocery stores. Are you in favor? 416-360-0740 or 1-866-740-4740. Joining the conversation is Steve Beauchesne with the Ontario Craft Brewers. And on the line, we've got Maria from Toronto. Maria, what do you think about this plan, this proposal?
Hi, yes.
What do you think about selling beer in grocery stores?
Okay, I don't agree, and I have to tell you, because I don't understand why so much freedom to sell the beer in the stores. Meanwhile, it's always a big deal for a pack of cigarettes, and cigarettes are not as dangerous to anyone as alcohol, okay? So I don't agree at all.
Okay, well, we appreciate your opinion. There are many health experts who would think differently on that. Certainly, cigarette smoking has been known to cause all kinds of cancers and disease, including most notably lung cancer, whereas drinking in moderation does not have the same effect, according to the research that we have at our disposal in 2015. We'll carry on with your phone calls. Len from Hamilton, what do you think about the proposal of selling beer in some of the province's grocery stores?
Oh, I don't find a problem with that. And the craft beers I'm kind of excited about. In fact, the one Steve has there is excellent. I love that lug tread.
Hey, thank you.
I go to Calgary, and Calgary has the craft beers, and they're quite enjoyable too. They have restaurants with their brewery and their mini breweries, and they're excellent. So.
Oh, great, Len. Thank you. Thanks for your call.
Okay, then.
Yeah, I would think, Steve, that the best friends for craft brewers are certainly restaurant owners, because that's where we have an opportunity to try out the beers, right?
Absolutely, and that's a great way to see what happens in a marketplace where it's not dominated. So independent restaurants will choose what they think is best for their customers and what's going to make their establishment as exciting as possible. And that's why you get to see such a wide variety of craft beer at the restaurants that you don't necessarily get to see at the beer store right now.
And why do you think you get such a good reception from restaurant owners to have your beers on their menu? I mean, they're certainly getting the same kind of pressure from the big brewers that the beer store is.
Yeah, and there is a lot of pressure from the big brewers, but the fact of the matter is that if you're running a restaurant, you have to do something to make your restaurant more exciting than the one next to you. And you do that with your atmosphere, with your food, but also with your drink menu. And I think a lot of people these days, they'll choose a restaurant very much so based on what beers are on tap and what kind of lineup the restaurant has. And it's now getting to a point where, if you don't have an interesting lineup of beer, people just won't go to your restaurant anymore.
And there's really an interesting dynamic that's playing out in the beer industry workforce. More than 1,000 employees work for independent brewers, while 2,600 work for Labatt, Molson, and Sleeman. Do you expect this number of employees in the craft brew industry to grow?
Well, if we can get the changes to access, we expect that we can double or even triple our numbers. And it's not too difficult to imagine that, because we've got currently about 30% of all the brewery jobs are in craft beer, but craft beer only has 3.8% of the market share.
Right.
So we don't need a lot of market share to create a lot of jobs. And that's because we're actually brewing it, distributing it, marketing it, selling it, all within the province. So it creates so many more jobs when it's all done right in the province.
Certainly you could say, and it is a stereotype, but Canadians do like to drink beer. We really do. Even those of us who don't, are more wine drinkers, we certainly like to partake. And I know myself, and maybe a lot of women feel the same way. Sometimes when I like to take a break from having wine, I'll try out a craft brew beer because it tastes different than the typical large brewery beers. It's more interesting. And I'm sure you get that kind of feedback all the time.
Absolutely. With craft beer, there's such a wide range of flavors and styles that we're brewing, and we've really sort of taken beer from being that commodity where it really didn't matter what brand or what style you were buying. It all tasted the same, and we've elevated it to something that is really special. And there's so much work and care put into making the beer that we do that. Pretty much, I've never found someone that we can't find a beer that they like. Even people that tell me that they can't drink beer at all, I'm always able to find a beer that they actually do enjoy.
It's great. It's the full palate, the full complement of taste when it comes to beer drinking. Steve, thanks for your time and for providing an update for us as we wait for the announcement on beer being sold in grocery stores in Ontario.
Thanks for your interest. Cheers.
Cheers. Cheers.
You're listening to an exclusive podcast of Goldhawk Fights Back for You on AM 740 Zoomer Radio. Goldhawk Fights Back for You airs Monday to Friday, 11 to 1 on AM 740 Zoomer Radio.